In 1962, Nelson Mandela was taken from his home, thrown into a prison cell, and declared a threat to the state. But South Africa's attempt to break him didn't crush the movement, it forged it. Behind bars, strategies were planned, alliances were built, and a leader was shaped not by freedom but by confinement. In trying to stop him, the system unknowingly helped create the very president it would one day have to face.
August 5, 1962. A dusty road outside Howick, Natal Province, South Africa. The sun hangs low over the rolling hills as a car winds through the countryside. Behind the wheel sits Nelson Mandela, dressed as a chauffeur, his face partially obscured by the uniform's cap. He's been underground for 17 months, constantly moving, always one step ahead. They call him the Black Pimpernel, South Africa's most wanted man, slipping through the regime's fingers like smoke. But today, the smoke clears. A police roadblock materializes ahead. Mandela slows the vehicle. His heart doesn't race. He's trained himself for this moment. But somewhere in his chest, he knows, this is it. The run is over. 3 armed officers approach. They don't ask for papers. They already know who he is. Someone talked. Someone always talks when the security police turn up the pressure. Within minutes, Mandela is in handcuffs, the metal cold against his wrists. The officers smile. They've just captured the symbol of African resistance. They have no idea what they've actually done. Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela didn't start as a revolutionary. Born in 1918 in the rural Transkei, he was groomed for something different, to be an advisor to chiefs, a bridge between tradition and the colonial present. But Johannesburg changed him. The golden city of South Africa, built on the backs of black miners extracting wealth they'd never see, showed Mandela the machinery of oppression in brutal clarity. He studied law, opened South Africa's first black law firm with Oliver Tambo, defended people whose only crime was being born with the wrong skin color in their own land. And slowly, inevitably, he was pulled into the African National Congress, the organization that dared to imagine a South Africa where everyone, regardless of color, could be free. By 1952, Mandela was organizing the Defiance Campaign, mass civil disobedience against apartheid's racist laws. Pass laws that controlled where black people could live, work, even walk. Laws that made loving someone of another race a crime. Laws that turned the majority of South Africa's population into foreigners in their own country. The regime noticed. How could they not? This tall, charismatic lawyer was organizing resistance that couldn't be ignored. They banned him from political activity, confined him to Johannesburg, banned him again. But Mandela didn't stop. He went underground in 1961, becoming a ghost, appearing at secret meetings, planning the next phase of resistance. That's when everything changed. For decades, the ANC had committed to non-violent resistance, Gandhi's philosophy applied to South Africa's struggle. But after the Sharpeville massacre in 1960, when police opened fire on peaceful protesters, killing 69 people and wounding hundreds more, something broke. Mandela made a decision that would define his life. If the regime would only speak the language of violence, then resistance had to learn that language too. He helped found Umkhonto we Sizwe, Spear of the Nation, the armed wing of the ANC. Not to kill, not yet, but to sabotage, to hit infrastructure, government buildings, symbols of apartheid power, to make oppression expensive. He traveled to Algeria, Ethiopia, receiving military training, securing support from newly independent African nations. This was 1962, the year of African independence, when the continent was shaking off colonial chains. Mandela returned home inspired, carrying plans for a sustained campaign of sabotage. But the security police were waiting. An informant, some say it was a CIA tip, America supporting apartheid in the name of Cold War politics, had revealed his movements. That roadblock wasn't random, it was a targeted strike. Now, as the police car carries him towards Johannesburg, Mandela stares out the land he's fought for. He doesn't know he won't see freedom again for 27 years. He doesn't know that this arrest will transform him from a resistance leader into something far more powerful, a living symbol that will haunt the regime until it crumbles. The trial begins in October 1962. Mandela stands accused of inciting workers to strike and leaving the country without a passport. The courtroom in Pretoria is packed. Mandela appears in traditional Xhosa clothing, a gesture of defiance, a reminder that he doesn't recognize the court's authority. He's convicted, 5 years, sent to Pretoria local prison. The regime thinks it's won. They've captured their enemy, silenced his voice. But they haven't learnt the most dangerous thing about symbols. You can't imprison an idea. And they're about to make that mistake permanent. July 11, 1963. Rivonia, a suburb north of Johannesburg. Police surround a farm compound. Inside, in a thatched roof building disguised as a domestic workers' quarters, the High Command of Umkhonto we Sizwe sits in emergency meeting. Maps spread across tables. Documents detailing Operation Maibuye, a plan for guerrilla warfare across South Africa. They're planning the next phase of resistance when the doors burst open. The raid is surgical, precise. The security police have been watching for months. They seize everything: papers, plans, evidence of sabotage operations already carried out. They arrest Walter Sisulu, Govan Beki, Ahmed Katrada, Dennis Goldberg, and others. The entire leadership of the armed struggle captured in one swoop. And they have exactly what they need to destroy Nelson Mandela permanently. Mandela is already in prison, serving his 5-year sentence. But now the regime sees an opportunity. They'll put him on trial again, this time for sabotage and conspiracy to overthrow the government. Crimes that carry one sentence: death. October 1963. The Rivonia trial begins in Pretoria's Palace of Justice. It's called the Rivonia trial because of where the arrests happened, but everyone knows what it really is. The apartheid regime putting African resistance itself on trial. 11 men stand accused. The world watches. The prosecution lays out their case with meticulous detail. Evidence of sabotage attacks on power stations, government offices, plans for guerrilla warfare, testimonies from informants. The state's message is clear. These men are terrorists who deserve to hang. But Mandela and his co-accused refuse to play the role of defendants begging for mercy. April 20, 1964. Mandela rises to make his statement from the dock. He's 45 years old, his hair still dark, his presence commanding even in the defendant's box. For over 4 hours he speaks, not as a criminal defending himself, but as a leader explaining why resistance became necessary. His voice fills the courtroom, calm, measured, devastating. He describes growing up in South Africa, watching his people stripped of their land, their rights, their dignity. He explains the formation of Umkhonto we Sizwe, not as an act of aggression, but as a last result after decades of peaceful protest met with violence. He details the brutal reality of apartheid. Black children dying of malnutrition while white children thrive. Black workers paid starvation wages to enrich white mine owners. An entire population turned into second-class citizens in the land of their ancestors. During my lifetime, I have dedicated myself to this struggle of the African people, Mandela says, his words steady and clear. I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. The courtroom is silent. Even the judges lean forward. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die. The last sentence hangs in the air like thunder. Mandela sits down. His lawyers know what he's just done. Refused to beg for his life. Refused to show remorse. Refused to give the regime the satisfaction of seeing him broken. He's turned his defense into an indictment of apartheid itself. The international response is immediate. Protest marches erupt in London, New York, Lagos, Accra. The United Nations Security Council calls for the defendant's release. World leaders issue statements. But inside South Africa, the regime doesn't flinch. These men challenged white supremacy. They must be punished. June 11, 1964. The courtroom fills again for sentencing. Mandela and 7 others, Walter Sisulu, Govan Beki, Raymond Mhlaba, Elias Motsoaledi, Andrew Mlangeni, Ahmed Katrada, and Dennis Goldberg stand as the judge prepares to speak. Winnie Mandela sits in the gallery, her face composed but her hands gripped tight. She knows her husband might be sentenced to death. She's prepared herself to be a widow. The judge speaks. The sentence in the case of all the accused will be one of life imprisonment. Not death, life. The courtroom exhales, relief mixed with devastation. These men will not hang, but they will disappear into South Africa's prison system, buried alive while the world moves on without them. The regime thinks it's found the perfect solution. Keep them alive to avoid international martyrdom, but locked away forever where they can't cause trouble. It's a calculation that will prove catastrophically wrong. Within hours, the convicted men are processed, stripped of their names and given numbers. Mandela becomes prisoner 46664, the 460th prisoner admitted in 1964. They are loaded onto a military transport plane. No one tells them where they are going. They fly south over the Cape until the aircraft descends towards a small island visible in the cold Atlantic waters, Robben Island. The name means Seal Island in Dutch, named for the seals that once populated its shores. But there are no seals now, only a maximum security prison 7 miles off the coast of Cape Town, surrounded by freezing waters and great white sharks. It's South Africa's Alcatraz, a place designed to break men, to erase them from history. As the plane touches down, Mandela looks out at the barren landscape, rocky, windswept, isolated. He doesn't know he'll spend the next 18 years here. He doesn't know this island will become synonymous with his name, that tourists will one day visit his cell like a shrine. Right now, all he knows is that the regime has just made a critical error. They think isolation will diminish him. They think time will make people forget. They're about to learn that some men don't break. Some men become harder with pressure, like diamonds formed deep in the earth. And some men, when you try to bury them, become the foundation on which new nations are built.
June 13, 1964. Robben Island, maximum security prison. The prison truck stops at the gates. Mandela and his comrades step out into the wind, cold, relentless, carrying salt spray from the Atlantic. Guards shout orders in Afrikaans. Strip. Put on these clothes. The uniforms are deliberate humiliation. Short pants, like those worn by boys. Black prisoners wear short pants. Colored prisoners, those of mixed race in apartheid's obsessive classification, get long trousers. Even in prison, the hierarchy of skin color is enforced. Mandela is taken to B section, the isolation wing reserved for political prisoners. His cell is 8 feet by 7 feet, a straw mat on the floor, a bucket for a toilet, a small barred window, too high to see out of properly. This concrete box will be his world. The guards make the rules clear immediately. No newspapers, no visitors except once every 6 months. Letters restricted to 1 every 6 months, heavily censored. Any reference to politics scratched out with black ink until the pages look like redacted government documents. The regime wants these men to disappear, not just from South Africa, but from their own lives. The work begins the next morning. Mandela and hundreds of other prisoners are marched to the limestone quarry in the center of the island. The sun reflects off the white rock with blinding intensity. They are given picks, hammers, and a quota. Break limestone, load it into wheelbarrows, move it, repeat. 8 hours a day under the merciless sun. The limestone dust gets into everything: eyes, lungs, skin. It's back-breaking labor designed to crush spirits. Mandela is 46 years old, a lawyer and activist, now swinging a pick like a common laborer. The guards watch for any sign of resistance, any excuse to punish. But something unexpected happens in that quarry. The prisoners talk. Between the hammer strikes, during water breaks, in the brief moments when guards aren't watching, they talk. About politics, about philosophy, about the future they are fighting for. Mandela begins teaching other prisoners history, economics, political theory. The quarry becomes a university. The isolation wing becomes a think tank. Walter Sisulu, the elder statesman of the ANC, moderates debates. Ahmed Kathrada brings humor and perspective. Govan Mbeki, a scholar, lectures on African history. These men whom the regime tried to silence create an underground academy of resistance. Mandela establishes routines. He wakes up at 5 a.m., exercises in his cell, running in place, push-ups, sit-ups. He studies Afrikaans, the language of the oppressor, believing you must understand your enemy to defeat him. He reads everything the prison allows: classics, history, political theory.
He smuggles his autobiography out in stages, written secretly at night, hidden and eventually buried in the prison garden. The guards try to break him. They assign him the worst tasks. They deny requests out of spite. They mock him. But Mandela has discovered something powerful. Dignity is not something they can take. It's something you keep by choosing how you respond. When a guard is abusive, Mandela speaks to him calmly, respectfully, as an equal. When officials visit, he addresses them with courtesy but never submission. He refuses to let them see him broken. And slowly, imperceptibly, something shifts. Some guards begin to treat him differently. Not all, many remain brutal, but some begin to see him as a man, not a number. The years grind on. 1965, 1966, 1967. Outside, the world is changing. African nations are consolidating independence. The civil rights movement in America forces confrontation with racism. Anti-apartheid movements grow in Europe. But inside Robben Island, time moves differently. The same concrete walls, the same limestone dust, the same isolation. Mandela's mother dies in 1968. He's denied permission to attend her funeral. His oldest son, Tembi, dies in a car accident in 1969. Again, no permission to attend the funeral. The regime knows that breaking a man isn't just about physical conditions. It's about severing his connections to everything he loves. But Mandela doesn't break. He grieves alone in his cell, then returns to his routine. Exercise, study, organize, teach. He's playing a long game the guards can't comprehend. In 1975, prison authorities start allowing prisoners to study for university degrees through correspondence. Mandela enrolls in a law degree through the University of London. Other prisoners follow. The prison authorities think they are being progressive, showing the world that South Africa treats its prisoners humanely. They don't realize they are strengthening the very men they are trying to weaken. The conditions slowly improve, not from mercy but from pressure. International campaigns demand better treatment. The Red Cross inspects. Journalists write exposés. By the mid-1970s, prisoners get long pants regardless of race, better food, slightly more privileges. Each small victory is hard-won. But the isolation remains. Mandela watches through his high window as seasons change. Summer heat, winter cold, the Atlantic storms that batter the island. He's disconnected from his family. His wife Winnie faces constant harassment from the security police, arrested, banned, tortured, exiled to remote towns. His daughters grow up with a father who is more symbol than presence. But something remarkable happens during these years. The regime thinks isolation will make people forget Mandela, but the opposite occurs. His absence becomes presence. The longer he's imprisoned, the larger he looms in the global imagination. By 1980, Mandela has been in prison for 18 years. A new generation of South Africans has grown up never knowing him as a free man. To them, he's mythology, the prisoner who refuses to compromise, the leader who chose suffering over surrender. International pressure intensifies. Free Mandela becomes a rallying cry. Concert halls echo with calls for his release. Governments impose sanctions. The UN declares apartheid a crime against humanity. Mandela's face appears on posters from London to Lagos, Sydney to Sao Paulo. The regime faces a problem. They imprison Mandela to silence him. Instead, they've created the most powerful voice against apartheid, a voice that speaks loudest in silence. Every year he remains in prison, his moral authority grows. Every year apartheid looks more indefensible. In 1980, in a desperate attempt to reduce his symbolic power, the regime moves Mandela off Robben Island. They transfer him to Paul Small Prison on the mainland, a modern facility where he has better conditions but is more isolated from other political prisoners. The calculation is simple. Separate him from his community, give him comfort. Maybe he will soften. They still don't understand what they are dealing with. Mandela is 64 years old now, 20 years in prison. His hair has gone white. His face carries the lines of confinement, but his mind is sharper than ever and his resolve hasn't wavered. Inside his cell at Portsmouth, as the Cape Town lights twinkle in the distance through his window, he can feel something changing. The world is shifting beneath apartheid's feet, and the regime is about to realize that the prisoner they created has become the one person in South Africa they cannot ignore.
March 21st, 1985. Langa Township, outside Cape Town. Police open fire on a funeral procession. 20 people die. It's the 25th anniversary of the Sharpeville massacre, and history is repeating itself with brutal precision. But this time, something is different. This time, South Africa explodes. Townships across the country erupt in protest. Not scattered demonstrations, sustained rebellion. Students boycott schools. Workers strike. The machinery of apartheid begins to seize. The regime declares a state of emergency. Troops patrol black neighborhoods like an occupying army. Thousands are arrested. Hundreds are killed. And everywhere, on walls and signs and banners, one name appears: Mandela. Free Mandela. Mandela or war. Mandela is our leader. He's been in prison for 23 years. Most young protesters have never heard his voice except through stories passed down. But his imprisonment has transformed him into something more powerful than any political leader could be. A symbol of everything apartheid tried to destroy and couldn't. The regime finally sees its mistake. By imprisoning Mandela, they didn't eliminate a threat. They created a martyr who is still breathing, a hero who grows stronger with every passing year. Every day he remains in prison is another day the world sees apartheid's moral bankruptcy on display. President P.W. Botha, the architect of apartheid's iron fist, makes a calculation. In January 1985, he offers Mandela a deal: renounce violence and you can go free. The offer reaches Mandela at Portsmouth prison. His family and comrades gather to hear his response. Everyone knows what freedom means to a man who's been locked away for 2 decades. Everyone knows the weight of that cell, the years stolen, the life he could reclaim. Mandela dictates his response to his daughter Zinzi. She reads it to a crowd of thousands in Soweto on February 10, 1985. Her father's words, spoken through her voice, reached the world. I cannot and will not give any undertaking at a time when I and you, the people, are not free. Your freedom and mine cannot be separated. The crowd erupts. Mandela has refused the regime's bargain. He's chosen to remain in prison rather than compromise the principles he's been imprisoned for. The message is clear. Apartheid must end, not be reformed. Freedom must be real, not conditional. The regime is stunned. They offered him the one thing every prisoner wants, and he said no. They don't understand that Mandela stopped being just a prisoner years ago. He's become the embodiment of an idea that justice cannot be negotiated away, that dignity is non-negotiable, that freedom means freedom for everyone,
or it means nothing. The international response is immediate and overwhelming. Free Mandela campaigns intensify. In London, over 200,000 people attend a concert at Wembley Stadium demanding his release, broadcast to 600 million people across 67 countries. Artists refuse to perform in South Africa. Companies divest. Banks refuse loans. Governments impose sanctions. The economic pressure becomes unbearable. South Africa's currency collapses. Foreign investment evaporates. The rand loses half its value. Major corporations pull out. Even stalwart allies begin to distance themselves. Apartheid isn't just morally indefensible anymore. It's economically unsustainable. And everywhere, Mandela's face haunts the regime. On protest signs, in newspaper editorials, in diplomatic conversations. He's in prison, voiceless, yet his presence dominates every discussion about South Africa's future. Inside Pollsmoor, Mandela watches these developments with keen strategic insight. He's had 23 years to think, to plan, to prepare. The regime thinks imprisonment has isolated him from reality. But through visitors, smuggled newspapers, and carefully coded messages, he's remained connected to the struggle's evolution. He sees what many don't yet understand. Apartheid is dying, but its death could take everyone down with it. The country is sliding toward civil war, township rebellions, security force brutality, retaliatory violence. The cycle is accelerating, and South Africa is approaching a precipice. Mandela makes a decision that will define his legacy. In 1985, while still imprisoned, while officially having no power, he begins making contact with the regime, not to surrender, to negotiate. His comrades are skeptical. Some see it as betrayal. But Mandela has learned something in prison that took 23 years to fully understand. Victory isn't just about defeating your enemy. It's about creating a future both sides can live in. The first meetings are secret. Prison officials visit his cell at night. Conversations start cautiously. Mandela is testing the waters, seeing if the regime is serious about change or just looking for a propaganda victory. The officials report back to their superiors. This man is not broken. He is not desperate. He negotiates from a position of moral strength that no amount of imprisonment has diminished. In 1988, Mandela is moved again, this time to Victor Verster Prison, a facility where he's given a cottage with a swimming pool. The regime is preparing for something. The conditions improve dramatically, but it's not mercy, it's staging. They are getting ready for his release, trying to normalize the idea before it happens. Mandela is 70 years old, 26 years in prison. His hair is white, his face weathered, but his mind remains sharp as broken glass. He uses the cottage to hold meetings with prison officials, government ministers, eventually with President Botha himself. The conversations are extraordinary. Here is the man the regime imprisoned for life, discussing the terms of South Africa's transformation with the very people who locked him away. Mandela doesn't rage. He doesn't demand vengeance.
He speaks about reconciliation, about building a non-racial democracy, about saving South Africa from the abyss. The regime begins to realize something terrifying. They need Mandela more than he needs them. Without him, there's no credible negotiating partner for the anti-apartheid movement. Without him, the townships will burn until there's nothing left to govern. Without him, international isolation will strangle what remains of the economy. Without him, the country descends into a race war that no one can win. By imprisoning Mandela, the regime created the one person who could potentially save South Africa from itself. They tried to eliminate their enemy and instead forged the only leader with enough moral authority to guide the country through its most dangerous transition. In 1989, P.W. Botha suffers a stroke and is replaced by F.W. de Klerk. De Klerk is a pragmatist. He sees the writing on the wall. Apartheid is over. The only question is whether it ends in negotiation or annihilation. And the only person who can deliver a negotiated end is sitting in a cottage in Victor Verster prison. On February 2, 1990, de Klerk makes
February 11, 1990, Victor Verster Prison, Paarl, Western Cape. The world holds its breath. Camera crews from every major network crowd outside the prison gates. Thousands of people line the streets of Cape Town, waiting. The scheduled release time, 3 p.m., comes and goes. 4 p.m., 5 p.m., still no Mandela. Confusion ripples through the crowd. Has the regime changed its mind? Is this another cruel deception? Inside the prison cottage, Mandela is calm. He's insisted on walking out at a specific time in a specific way. This is his moment, and after 27 years, he refuses to be rushed. He puts on a dark suit. Winnie helps him with his tie. They've both aged. Winnie has fought her own battles outside, harassed and tortured by the security police, exiled and banned, becoming a controversial figure in her own right. But today, they stand together. Finally, at 4:16 p.m., the gates open. Mandela emerges, hand in hand with Winnie, his right fist raised in the ANC salute. The crowd erupts. People weep. Cameras flash like lightning. After 10,000 days in prison, Nelson Mandela walks into the sun as a free man. But he's not walking into peace. He's walking into the most delicate, dangerous negotiation in African history. The drive to Cape Town takes hours, not because of distance, because thousands of people flood the streets. They want to see him, touch him, confirm that the legend is real. When Mandela finally reaches the Grand Parade in front of City Hall, 50,000 people pack the square. He steps onto the balcony, the same balcony from which apartheid officials once governed, and addresses the nation. His voice, unheard in public for 27 years, carries across the crowd. Friends, comrades, and fellow South Africans, I greet you all in the name of peace, democracy, and freedom for all. The words are measured, careful. This is not a victory speech. This is an opening move in a game where one wrong step could plunge South Africa into civil war. Mandela knows this. He's thought about this moment every day for 27 years. I stand here before you not as a prophet, but as a humble servant of you, the people. Your tireless and heroic sacrifices have made it possible for me to be here today. I therefore place the remaining years of my life in your hands." He's free, but the struggle isn't over. Apartheid's laws remain on the books. The security forces still control the streets. Black South Africans still can't vote. The regime has released Mandela, but they haven't surrendered power. The negotiation begins immediately. On one side, the National Party government, backed by the military, police, and the economic establishment that has profited from apartheid for decades. On the other, the ANC, newly unbanned, its leadership returning from exile or emerging from prison, representing millions of Black South Africans demanding their freedom. Between them sits the future of South Africa, and it's balanced on a knife's edge. The regime wants a deal that protects white interests, constitutional guarantees, power-sharing arrangements, protection for property and pensions. They want apartheid to end, but they don't want to lose everything they've built on its foundation. The ANC demands majority rule. One person, one vote, non-racial democracy, justice for decades of oppression. They've fought too long, sacrificed too much to accept anything less than full equality. And Mandela must somehow find a path between these positions that doesn't end in bloodshed. The negotiations take place at the World Trade Center in Kempton Park, a convention center northeast of Johannesburg. It becomes known as CODESA, Convention for a Democratic South Africa. Representatives from 19 political parties gather. The room crackles with tension. These people have been enemies. Some have imprisoned others. Some have ordered killings. Some have lost family members to the other side's violence. Mandela chairs the ANC delegation with the same strategic brilliance he showed before prison. He's learned the regime's language. He speaks Afrikaans fluently now. He understands their fears. He knows what they need to hear to feel safe enough to give up power. But he also knows his own people's expectations. They've waited generations for freedom. They've buried too many matters. They won't accept a negotiated settlement that feels like surrender. It's an impossible balance, and it nearly collapses multiple times. Violence continues during the negotiations. In June 1992, the Boipatong massacre, attackers from a hostel kill 45 people in a township. Evidence suggests security forces were involved. The ANC walks out of talks. The country teeters. Mandela faces pressure from all sides. Young activists call him a sellout for negotiating at all. They want revolution, not compromise. Conservative whites plot to derail the process, assassinating Chris Hani, the popular ANC leader, in April 1993. The murder almost ignites the civil war everyone fears. But Mandela holds the center. When Hani is killed, he addresses the nation on television, not as a political leader, but as a statesman. He calls for calm. He appeals to South Africans' better nature. He mourns Hani while insisting the negotiations must continue. Tonight, I am reaching out to every single South African, black and white, from the very depths of my being. A white man, full of prejudice and hate, came to our country and committed a deed so foul that our whole nation now teeters on the brink of disaster.
But a white woman of Afrikaner origin risked her life so that we may know and bring to justice this assassin. It's classic Mandela, acknowledging the pain while offering a path forward, refusing to let one person's hatred define an entire people, building bridges even as others try to burn them. The negotiations grind forward. Constitutional principles are hammered out. Election dates are set. Details are debated. How to transition the security forces. How to handle past crimes. What protections minorities will have in a majority-ruled country. Mandela makes compromises that anger his more radical supporters. He agrees to a government of national unity that will include the National Party in a coalition. He agrees to protect civil service jobs, which means many apartheid-era officials will keep their positions. He agrees to amnesty processes that might allow perpetrators of terrible crimes to avoid punishment. But he secures the core demand: one person, one vote, universal adult suffrage, democracy. In 1993, Mandela and F.W. de Klerk jointly received the Nobel Peace Prize. The symbolism is powerful but controversial. How can the man who maintained apartheid for years share a prize with the man who fought it? But the Nobel Committee understands something crucial. Both men are choosing negotiation over war, compromise over vengeance. Mandela uses his Nobel speech to honor those who didn't survive to see this moment. We speak here of the challenge of the dichotomies of war and peace, violence and non-violence, racism and human dignity, oppression and repression, and liberty and human rights. He's honoring the struggle while pointing towards the future, never forgetting but always moving forward. By early 1994, the framework is in place. South Africa will hold its first democratic elections on April 27, 1994. Every adult, regardless of race, will vote. The result will determine who governs
Africa's most industrialized nation. The regime has finally accepted what Mandela's imprisonment couldn't break and his freedom couldn't avoid. The future belongs to everyone, not just a minority defined by skin color. But as election day approaches, one question dominates. Can South Africa actually pull this off? Can a country built on racial hierarchy for 350 years transform into a democracy peacefully? Can enemies become fellow citizens? The answer depends on the one thing the regime tried to destroy 30 years earlier: Nelson Mandela's leadership. They imprisoned him thinking they were eliminating a threat. Instead, they forged the leader who would guide South Africa through its most dangerous transition. The regime created their own future president. Now the entire country is about to discover what that means. April 27, 1994. Voting stations across South Africa. The lines start forming before dawn. Elderly women who've never voted in their lives, leaning on walking sticks, determined to cast their first ballot. Young people born into apartheid, finally claiming their voice. Workers taking the day off. Families traveling from rural areas.
The lines stretch for miles in some places. People waiting 4, 5, 6 hours under the sun. Many are voting for the first time at 60, 70, 80 years old. They bring their children and grandchildren, wanting them to witness this moment. Some weep as they mark their ballots. Some stand in silence, overwhelmed by the weight of what's happening. For the first time in South Africa's history, everyone can vote. Mandela casts his ballot in Oranje, Natal, near the grave of John Dube, the ANC's first president. The symbolism is deliberate, connecting this moment to the century-long struggle that preceded it. As Mandela places his vote in the box, he says words that capture the magnitude of the day. This is for all South Africans, an unforgettable occasion. It is the realization of hopes and dreams that we have cherished over decades. The voting continues for 4 days to accommodate the massive turnout. Observers from around the world monitor the process, watching for fraud, violence, irregularities. There are problems: ballot shortages in some areas, confusion about procedures, isolated incidents of intimidation. But the overall picture is clear. South Africa is transforming itself peacefully. On May 2nd, the results are announced. The ANC wins 62.6% of the vote. Not quite the 2/3 that would allow them to write the Constitution alone, but a commanding mandate. The National Party gets 20.4%. The Inkatha Freedom Party, representing Zulu traditional interests, gets 10.5%. Nelson Mandela will be South Africa's first black president. The man they imprisoned for life. The man they tried to erase from history. The man whose name was banned from public mention for years. That man will now lead the nation that tried to destroy him. May 10, 1994, the Union Buildings, Pretoria. Pretoria, the administrative capital, the heart of apartheid power, where laws were written to codify racial oppression, where officials designed the pass laws, the Group Areas Act, the Bantu education system, all the machinery of systemic dehumanization. Today, those same buildings host a different ceremony. World leaders gather: Bill Clinton, Fidel Castro, Yasser Arafat, Prince Philip. 40 heads of state and dignitaries witness what many thought impossible: the peaceful transfer of power from a white minority government to a democratic, non-racial government. South African military jets fly overhead in formation, trailing the new South African flag, replacing the old symbol of apartheid with colors representing all the nation's people: black, green, yellow, white, red, blue. A rainbow nation, as Archbishop Desmond Tutu will famously call it. Nelson Mandela, now 75 years old, takes the oath of office. His hand on the Bible, his voice steady. I, Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela, do hereby swear to be faithful to the Republic of South Africa, and do solemnly and sincerely promise to promote all that will advance, and to oppose all that may harm the Republic, to obey, observe, uphold and maintain the Constitution and all other laws of the Republic,
and to discharge my duties with all my strength and talents to the best of my knowledge and ability, and true to the dictates of my conscience. The oath complete, President Mandela addresses the nation and the world. The speech is measured, inclusive, visionary. This is not a moment for triumphalism or revenge. This is a moment for building. We enter into a covenant that we shall build the society in which all South Africans, both black and white, will be able to walk tall without any fear in their hearts, assured of their inalienable right to human dignity, a rainbow nation at peace with itself and the world. He speaks of reconciliation, not retribution, of building, not destroying, of a future that includes everyone, even those who maintained apartheid, even those who imprisoned him. Never, never, and never again shall it be that this beautiful land will again experience the oppression of one by another, and suffer the indignity of being the skunk of the world. Let freedom reign. The crowd roars. Around the world, people watch on television, many weeping. The impossible has happened. The prisoner has become president. But Mandela knows the real work is just beginning. Elections are one thing. Governing is another. Transforming a society is something else entirely. South Africa in 1994 is a nation with multiple realities. In formerly white areas, infrastructure is first world, paved roads, electricity, running water, good schools, hospitals. In black townships, millions live without basic services. No electricity, no clean water, overcrowded schools with few resources. The economic inequality is staggering, with centuries of wealth accumulation on one side and systematic impoverishment on the other. Mandela faces expectations he cannot possibly meet. His people want immediate transformation, jobs, houses, education, health care, reparations for centuries of theft and oppression. White South Africans want reassurance that they won't be dispossessed, that the country won't collapse into Zimbabwe-style chaos. The international community watches, waiting to see if Africa can produce a successful democracy, or if this is another African tragedy in the making. Mandela's approach is strategic and symbolic in equal measure. He creates a government of national unity, including the National Party and other parties in his cabinet. F.W. de Klerk becomes deputy president. Former enemies sit in the same cabinet meetings, making decisions together. It's uncomfortable, tense, but it sends a message. Reconciliation is not optional. It's the only path forward. Mandela establishes the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, chaired by Archbishop Desmond Tutu. The concept is revolutionary. Perpetrators of apartheid-era crimes can receive amnesty if they fully disclose their actions and show they were politically motivated. Victims can tell their stories, finally have their pain acknowledged. It's imperfect. Many feel justice is sacrificed for peace. Victims confront their torturers and watch them walk free. But Mandela argues that prosecuting everyone responsible for apartheid crimes would tear the country apart. The nation is too fragile, the wounds too fresh. Truth,
acknowledgement, and amnesty, not perfect justice, but perhaps the justice that allows everyone to move forward. He makes symbolic gestures that shock the world. He invites his former prison guards to his presidential inauguration. He has tea with the widow of Hendrik Verwoerd, the architect of apartheid. He wears a Springbok rugby jersey, the symbol of white Afrikaner identity, to the 1995 Rugby World Cup final, supporting a team that black South
Africans once rooted against Nkoya. When South Africa wins that rugby match, the moment transcends sport. White Afrikaners who once saw Mandela as a terrorist chant his name. Black South Africans who once hated the Springboks celebrate. It's a glimpse of what the new South Africa could become. Mandela serves one 5-year term and refuses to seek re-election despite pressure to stay. He's establishing a precedent. Leaders should serve and then step aside. Democracy requires more than just voting. It requires peaceful transfer of power, respect for term limits, institutions stronger than individuals. On his last day in office in 1999, Mandela reflects on what's been accomplished. Apartheid laws have been dismantled. A progressive constitution guarantees rights for all. Millions have access to clean water and electricity who didn't before. Schools are integrated. A black middle class is emerging. But he's honest about what remains undone. Inequality persists. Unemployment remains high. HIV/AIDS is devastating communities. Crime has increased. The transformation is incomplete and perhaps always will be. Yet, what Mandela achieved is undeniable. He took a country on the brink of race war and guided it to democracy. He could have sought revenge. His people would have supported it, even demanded it. Instead, he chose reconciliation. He could have clung to power. Many African leaders do. Instead, he stepped aside. The prisoner became president, and then, remarkably, the president became a private citizen again, proving that the position was never about him. It was about the nation he helped birth. December 5, 2013, Johannesburg, South Africa. Nelson Mandela dies at home, surrounded by family. He's 95 years old. The announcement sends shockwaves around the world. Though his death has been expected, he's been ill for months, his public appearances increasingly rare. The finality still hits hard. Within hours, people begin gathering outside his home in Hockton. Flowers pile up. Candles flicker in the darkness. Strangers embrace, weeping. South Africans of all races stand together, united in grief for the man who united them. But this moment of mourning is also a moment of reckoning. What did Mandela's journey actually mean? What did those 27 years in prison create? What does his transformation from prisoner to president teach us about power, justice, and the possibility of change? The story starts with a profound irony that the apartheid regime never understood. Some things become more powerful when you try to destroy them. In 1962, when police arrested Mandela on that dusty road outside Harwich,
The regime thought they were solving a problem. This charismatic lawyer was organizing resistance, founding guerrilla movements, threatening the white supremacist order. Lock him away and the problem disappears. But imprisonment doesn't work that way. Not when the prisoner represents an idea larger than himself. Every day Mandela spent in that cell on Robben Island was another day that testified to apartheid's brutality. Every letter censored, every funeral he couldn't attend, every year stolen from his life became evidence of the regime's moral bankruptcy. They couldn't make him disappear because his absence was the message. The regime created what scholars call a mobilizing symbol, a focal point around which resistance could coalesce. Free Mandela became shorthand for End Apartheid. His face on a protest sign carried the weight of the entire struggle. They tried to silence him and instead give him the loudest voice in the country. This is the first lesson of Mandela's imprisonment. Authoritarian regimes often create their own worst enemies. By treating dissent as an existential threat, by overreacting with brutal repression, they validate the resistance. They prove that the system is exactly as unjust as its critics claim. The apartheid government could have marginalized Mandela. They could have let him operate within limited legal bounds, making him just another politician among many. Instead, they made him a martyr while he was still alive, giving him moral authority that no amount of political maneuvering could match. But the story doesn't end with imprisonment creating a symbol. It continues with what Mandela did with that symbol, how he wielded the moral authority his suffering created. Lesser leaders would have emerged from 27 years of imprisonment consumed by rage. Mandela had every reason for vengeance. The regime stole nearly 3 decades of his life. They prevented him from attending his mother's funeral, his son's funeral. They subjected him to hard labor, humiliation, isolation. They harassed and tortured his wife. They tried to break him in every way imaginable. And when he walked out of prison in 1990, he chose reconciliation. This is the second lesson. Moral authority is only as powerful as what you do with it. Mandela could have led South Africa into a race war. His people would have followed. The international community would have understood. Justice in its most basic form would demand retribution. Instead, he chose a harder path, building a nation that included his oppressors. Not because he was weak, but because he was strategic. He understood that revenge might feel satisfying, but it wouldn't build a functional country. Mandela the prisoner became Mandela the statesman, and that transformation saved South Africa. Consider what could have happened. In 1994, South Africa had all the ingredients for catastrophic violence. A white minority with wealth, weapons, and a security apparatus trained in brutality. A black majority with decades of grievances, legitimate claims to justice, and the numbers to take what they wanted. History suggested this would end in bloodshed. Look at Zimbabwe, where liberation became tyranny, where taking back the land destroyed the economy. Mandela prevented that outcome, not through weakness, but through a sophisticated understanding of power. He knew that sustainable victory requires your enemies to accept their defeat. You can conquer through force, but you can only govern through legitimacy. By including the National Party in his government, by protecting white interests enough that they didn't flee or rebel, by choosing the Truth and Reconciliation Commission over Nuremberg-style trials, Mandela built legitimacy. Was it perfect justice? No. Victims who suffered under apartheid watched their torturers confess and walk free. Families whose land was stolen didn't get it back. The economic inequality that apartheid created persists today. South Africa still struggles with the legacy of those centuries of oppression. But the country didn't collapse into civil war. It didn't become a failed state. It maintained democratic institutions. It became a beacon, imperfect, troubled, but functional, showing that transitions from oppression to democracy are possible. This is the fourth lesson. Transformation requires compromise, and compromise is not surrender. Mandela understood the difference. He never compromised on the core principle, one person, one vote, universal democracy. But he compromised on everything around it to make that core principle achievable. Young activists today sometimes criticize this approach. They see Mandela's reconciliation as too soft, argue that he should have pushed for more radical economic transformation, that he let white South Africans off too easily. There's truth in these critiques. The economic injustice persists. The wealth gap remains obscene. But these critics often miss the context of 1994. South Africa was armed to the teeth. The security forces could have fought. White militias were preparing for war. The country was on a precipice, and Mandela pulled it back. He chose a negotiated settlement over a perfect victory, because the perfect victory might have destroyed everything. The fourth lesson emerges from this. Leadership is about choosing between imperfect options and living with the consequences. Mandela made choices that disappointed some supporters. He didn't deliver immediate economic justice. He didn't punish all who deserved punishment. He left structural problems unsolved. But he did what only he could do: use the moral authority his imprisonment created to hold the country together long enough for democracy to take root. He was the bridge between the apartheid past and the democratic future, and bridges are meant to be crossed, not lived on forever. Mandela's story resonates beyond South Africa because it speaks to fundamental questions about human nature and political possibility. Can people change? Can enemies become partners? Can historical wrongs be addressed without creating new wrongs? Can justice and peace coexist? Mandela's answer to all these questions was a qualified yes, but only with leadership, courage, and strategic wisdom.
For Africa, Mandela's legacy is particularly significant. The continent has seen too many liberation heroes become dictators. Too many freedom fighters who, once in power, refused to leave. Too many leaders who solved colonial oppression by creating new forms of oppression. Mandela broke that pattern. He served one term and stepped aside, establishing that democracy means more than just getting to vote. It means peaceful transfer of power. He showed that African leadership can be visionary, principled, and self-limiting. This matters. When the apartheid regime imprisoned Mandela in 1964, Africa was in its first flush of independence. New nations were finding their way, defining what post-colonial governance would look like. Many took wrong turns: coups, dictatorships, ethnic violence, economic collapse. South Africa's transition, guided by Mandela, offered a different model. Not perfect, but functional. Not utopian, but pragmatic. A model that said transformation is possible, that democracy can work, that Africa can produce leaders who serve their people rather than themselves. Today, when young Africans look for examples of leadership worth emulating, Mandela stands as proof that the continent can produce world historical figures who change not just their own nations, but the global understanding of what's possible. The irony that began this story completes itself here. By imprisoning Mandela, the apartheid regime created the conditions for their own transformation. They thought they were eliminating a threat. Instead, they forged the leader who would guide them through the change they feared. They imprisoned an activist and released a statesman. They jailed a militant and freed a reconciler. They tried to break a man and instead created a symbol that broke their system. This is Mandela's ultimate legacy, the proof that history is not deterministic, that individuals matter, that leadership can bend the arc of events towards justice, and that even the cruelest systems contain the seeds of their own transformation. When South Africa imprisoned Mandela, they didn't know they were creating their own future president. But more than that, they were creating a leader whose story would inspire millions across Africa and around the world. A story that proves oppression can be overcome, justice can triumph, and that the human spirit, when tested, can emerge not broken but stronger. Nelson Mandela spent 27 years in prison. But in those years, something remarkable happened. The prisoner didn't just survive. He prepared. He studied his enemies. He refined his strategy. He built the patience, wisdom, and moral authority that would later guide a nation through its most dangerous transition. The regime gave him time to think, to plan, to become the leader South Africa needed but didn't yet know it needed. They gave him suffering that created moral authority no politician could manufacture. They gave him isolation that made his eventual freedom a global celebration. They tried to bury him, not knowing that prisoners who survive imprisonment with their principles intact don't stay buried. They become foundations. And on that foundation, a new South Africa was built. So, if this story moved you, if Mandela's journey from prisoner to president inspired you, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Drop a comment below and tell me what aspect of Mandela's story resonates most with you. Was it his refusal to compromise his principles? His choice of reconciliation over revenge? The way he transformed personal suffering into national healing? Subscribe to Rise of African Nations, because this is what we do here. We tell the stories that history tried to hide. We spotlight African brilliance, African resilience, African leadership that changed the world.
We're reclaiming the narratives one story at a time. And check the description below for the full blog post, where we dive even deeper into Mandela's imprisonment, the negotiations that ended apartheid, and the legacy that continues to shape South Africa today. Your support, your likes, your comments, your subscriptions, that's what allows us to keep making this content. That's what lets us keep telling these stories that need to be told. Stories of African nations rising, African leaders who changed history, African triumphs that the world needs to know. So, subscribe, show your support, and let's keep building this community together, honoring the past while inspiring the future. Because when South Africa imprisoned Mandela, they created their own future president. And when we tell these stories, we create our own future, one where Africa's brilliance is finally recognized, celebrated, and understood. Rise of African Nations, telling Africa's story, one powerful narrative at a time.